Today we will be multiplying binomials using the FOIL method. So let's take a look at how that works. It says up here the FOIL method is the first plus the outer plus the inner plus the last terms. So what we need to figure out is what are the first terms and what are the outer, inner, and last terms. Well, x and x, these are the two first terms in the binomials. So my first terms are x times by x, which makes x squared. Well, then we're going to add on the outside terms. So those are my outside terms there. The outer terms are x times by negative 5, which makes a negative 5x. Well, then we multiplied x by each of the terms. Let's move on to the inside terms then. So the inner terms are a 3 and an x being multiplied together, and that makes a positive 3x. And then we take a look at the last terms. That is the 3 being multiplied by the negative 5. And so that makes a negative 15. So we're able to collect a couple terms because they have the same variable raised to the same power. So these two terms right here, the outer and the inner terms, I need to subtract those because they are opposite in sign. So when I do that, I still have that x squared. The negative 5x and positive 3x make a negative 2x. And then I bring down that negative 15. And there's my answer. So that's multiplying binomials. Let's try a few more problems like that. So same sort of thing on this one. Here are first, outer, inner, and last terms is what I'm looking at here. So my first terms are the x and the x. So that just makes x squared. Those are the first terms. Well, then I move on to the x times by the negative 2. That makes a negative 2x. So x times by negative 2, negative 2x. Well, once we've done that, we move on to the 4 and multiply it. So here we have 4 times x makes a positive 4x. And then we have a 4 times by the negative 2 makes a negative 8. So now I'm able to collect a couple like terms here. And they have the same variable raised to the same power, so I'm left with an x squared. Here I have a positive 2x, and I bring down that negative 8. And there's the answer. Well, let's take a look at a few other problems. Here this is a little different, and the main thing that's different about this is we've got some coefficients. Well, just one in this case. Coefficient in front of the x term, so we're going to multiply the first terms. Those are our first terms. So remember the first terms, 3x times x. What does that make? 3x squared. So look at that. 3x times by x makes 3x squared. And then we add on the outside terms. So 3x times by the 3. 3x times by 3 makes 9x. Once we've multiplied the 3x by each, we can move on to this negative 2. And those are the inside terms. So I for inside, it is a negative 2 and an x makes negative 2x. Well, then we can multiply that negative 2 by the 3, and those are our last terms. And that makes a negative 6. So I can collect two terms. See, I can collect these two right here because they have the same variable raised to the same power. So let's see what our answer is. Well, nothing to combine with that 3x squared. Here, these combine, and they make a positive 7x. And then I bring down that negative 6. That's our answer. Oh, this problem is a little bit different because we have another extra coefficient here on those first terms. So again, it's 5 times by 2. So in the first terms, we have 5 and 2 make 10, but then you got to count up how many x's. X and x make x squared. Outside terms, that's the 5x and the negative 7. So that ends up giving me a negative 35x. So 5x times by negative 7, negative 35x. Once I've multiplied that number, let's move on to the next. So our inside terms are going to end up being a 2 times 2x. So that makes 4x. And then the last terms, 2 and negative 7, make a negative 14. So just like the others, we're able to collect right here. These are the same exponent on the x. And so we bring down our 10x squared. We subtract because they're opposite in sign, makes negative 31x. And I bring down that negative 14. There's our answer. Well, this next problem looks a little bit different. Here we have a x minus 4, and it's a quantity being squared. Well, a common mistake is people want to say x squared plus 16. That's wrong. People try to square the x squared the negative 4. That's not right. You've got to write it out twice and then use FOIL. And so from this point, we're going to write down our first, our outer, our inner, and our last terms. And so we'll go ahead and multiply those first terms here. And remember, it's going to be an x times by x. Those are our first terms, make x squared. The outside terms are x and negative 4. That makes a negative 4x. Then we move on to the inside terms and multiply the negative 4 and the x. Makes another negative 4x. And then the negative 4 and the negative 4, those are our last terms. Watch the sign there. Makes a positive 16. So we're able to collect the outside and inside terms and get our answer. So we bring down that x squared, makes a negative 8x and a positive 16. Well, let's take a look at the next one. Well, in this problem, we have a different situation because we have more than one unknown. We have two variables. Well, we're going to do the same method. We're using that FOIL method. Remember, it goes F-O-I-L, first, outer, inner, last. So let's take a look at our first terms here. We've got 2x and 5x. Careful on the coefficients first. 2 and 5 make 10. And then we have x times x makes x squared. Those are our first terms. Now we move on to the outside terms. 2x and negative 2y. So 2 times negative 2 makes a negative 4. And then we have an xy. So x and y are different variables, so we can't bring them together and change the exponent. We just write them next to each other. Well, we've done the first and the outside. Let's move on to the inner and the last. So the inside terms, 3 times 5 make 15. And then we have yx. Well, yx is the same as xy, so let's just write it that way. And then we have our last terms. So those were the inside terms. Last terms are 3y and a negative 2y. That makes a negative 6y squared because there's two y's being multiplied. Well, now we can go ahead and collect the like terms. See, these two terms have the same variable exponent combination. So we combine them and we bring down that 10x squared. We have to subtract because these are opposite in sign. So 11xy. And then we bring down this negative 6y squared. And there's our answer. Well, another problem to try. A little bit trickier because we have just more exponents. So let's take a look at our first terms there. First terms are a 2 times 7. Do it in steps here. 14. X squared and x squared. How many x's would we have? 4 x's altogether. So there's 2 and 2 make 4. Well, now you do 2x squared times by the 4y to the third. So those are the outside terms. So 2 times 4 makes 8, so we just do it in chunks. 2 and 4 make 8. X squared and y to the third. You can't combine them, so you just write them as separate terms. X squared, y to the third. Well, we move on. We've got the inside terms now. Inside are negative 3y squared and a 7x squared. So we write down, multiply negative 3 and 7, make a negative 21. And then you count up how many x's and y's you got. You got 2 x's and you got 3 y's. So x squared, y to the third. Well, last terms. We've got the negative 3 and the 4. So L for last. Negative 3 times by 4 makes negative 12. And then we've got some y's. We've got 3 y's here and 3 y's here. That makes 6 altogether. So there it is. Now we look to see if we can combine anything. Well, you got to look for the ones that have the same variables raised to the same powers. And these two do. They both have x squared, y to the third. So when we go ahead and do that work, we've got a 14x to the fourth. And then we count these up. We got 8. We got to subtract that from 21. gives us 13x squared y to the third. And then we've got our final term there, just that negative 12y to the sixth. And there it is. So those are the types of problems you'll end up seeing on tonight's homework. Good luck.